that the President of the United States, as he did in September, we had a no-drama action having to pass the CR. Every Democrat voted for it. It was a no drama. Why? Because the president said, well, that makes sense. We have agreement. Let's move forward, which is exactly what we did. I hope that Senator Schumer and the president get to that point, and because I think we have a basis for agreement that, as I said, I think we could do as early as later on this afternoon.
Did you see daylight in meetings with Nielsen? Did you see meetings you've been meeting with?
Yes.
Nielsen and Kelly?
Did I see daylight? Do you mean differences? Yes. Yes, if you mean there.
How about getting something done?
Well, how many questions you going to ask?
It's up to you all.
Yeah. Let me reiterate.
This is not a
24 members of the Senate and the House were in the White House sitting around the cabinet table. And the President of the United States said, we need to protect the Dreamers. He actually used DACA. We need to protect DACA, and we need to do that first. We agree.
Let me just say, in that vein, that if you would speak to the Speaker or Mr. McConnell, they will say to you, well, they say to us, we have to know what the President will sign. Is that not the ongoing chorus? We have to know what the President will sign. Hopefully, Mr. Schumer will find out what the President will sign. Because I do believe that, as Congresswoman Sanchez said, or Vice Chair said, the votes are there in the House and the Senate if they bring this up. Yes, sir.
Question.
No.
Do you support the Graham-Durbin proposal, even though it has this down payment on the border wall?
Well, you know, right now our position is that we want the DREAM Act, and we're willing to. We know our responsibility to secure our borders, north and south, and that's where our conversation is. So, well, thank you all very much. To be continued. We may be seeing each other further today. And one thing I
Hi again, everybody. Pilar Arias hopping in here on this wonderful Friday. How are y'all doing? We are going to continue to keep a very close eye on the Senate floor here to see what will happen. In the meantime, gonna say hello again. Hi, everybody. So, some good news. I got the clearance today when we are like waiting for a press conference to start. We normally call it podium watch. That I can like put up little, poll questions for you guys on the lower third. So, thumbs up, right? We're happy about that. Hey, it's been a busy week for Congress. Taking a look here live at Capitol Hill. What do you guys think? I'm not gonna put this as a lower third, but I mean, we've got just hours to go here. Do you think this government shutdown is going to happen? If not, why? I would like to see more than a yes or no. I'd like to see what you all think. So feel free to let me know. All right. Well, earlier today we got some footage from Hawaii. If you remember, they had that false alarm about a nuclear missile headed to the island. So they kind of did like a briefing update today to try to figure out how to make sure that this or such a thing never happens again. So let's take a listen to this, and a source did provide this to us, so I had to courtesy it.
Pursue solutions, I think, that not only benefit our community, but benefit the country as a whole. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I look forward to the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Keith Agaran, followed by Representative Cachola.
Thank you, Governor, for being here. Let me echo the comments of my neighbor island colleagues that in any planning that goes forward, that you don't forget us. We always feel a little left out. My question really goes to the follow-up now. I think you said that you've designated General Hara as the lead. What was your thinking behind doing that when obviously General Logan is the Director of Emergency Management, and any recommendations really should, through the chain of command, should be coming through him?
Certainly. I do believe that this is a specific tasking. General Logan has regular responsibilities and duties that he's involved with. Two things that we thought would be helpful in this exercise. One is obviously someone who has experience in disaster preparedness.
Hey everybody, the Senate floor is debating again, and I know a lot of people are watching for that, so let's head back there.
Of course, and that's two really, either to have an agreement that would carry forward before the deadline. That's, in my judgment, less likely to happen. I don't think anyone believes that will happen necessarily, but the other option, of course, is to have a number of days ahead of us agree upon 3 days, 4 days, whatever the leadership and the two sides can agree to continue negotiations, because of course we have a range of issues. Sometimes we haven't talked enough about the long list of issues. I'll get into a few tonight, but there is a rather long list of issues, some of which have already been the subject of bipartisan, not just consensus, but a bipartisan piece of legislation, actual bill text that has been introduced or could be introduced in short order in the next few days or even the next couple of hours. Then there are other issues where there have been ongoing negotiations for a long period of time, haven't yet reached consensus, but if we all give ourselves a deadline and stay here, and I hope that people in both parties would stay for the next few days, no matter what happens tonight, because if there is an extension of 3 or 4 days, that doesn't make it any less challenging, because that just means there'll be a deadline that'll be a short-term deadline. I don't think it makes any sense to go another month, because things will be kicked, the can in essence will be kicked down the road again. We need to make some decisions about some big issues. There are some who have observed that even if you were in favor of the measure that came over from the House last night, which I have real trouble with, a lot of gaping holes in that proposal, a lot of urgent matters for many Americans that have not been addressed in that proposal. But even if you favored that, you could also still hold the position you don't favor continuing resolution after continuing resolution. I guess we're on our fourth, if we have the right count, our fourth resolution since October the 1st, not that long ago. So that's at least my sense of where we could be in the next couple of days, not leaving Washington and staying at the negotiation table on a range of issues. That's the reasonable thing to do, not only to keep the government operating and open, but also to finally resolve some major issues which I think both parties, most of both parties, want to solve. But let me start tonight with some personal observations, or I should say personal letters. One of the major issues which is not resolved, but there's been a lot of effort made that's been bipartisan, and that's the issue of pensions. I've gotten letters from a lot of Pennsylvanians who say, look, it's up to you and up to people in both parties to solve this pension crisis that has engulfed so many families. In Pennsylvania, if you add up the categories of people affected, retirees and their families, you're talking about at least 35,000 people, 35,000 families, I should say. Usually because you have a retiree, and the largest share of those are coal miners in Pennsylvania. I'm sure it's true in other states as well. So I got a letter from a woman in Washington County, Pennsylvania, right in the southwestern corner of our state. And she wrote to me, and I won't read the whole letter, but she said, talking about her husband, who's a retired miner, she said, and I quote, "He worked for many years in the coal mines and has endured dangerous conditions, unsafe work hazards, and a mine fire, which he narrowly escaped, and the mine closed, forcing him to lose his job." Then she concludes the letter by saying, "This pension is so important to him and to us," and she goes on from there. So that's one person talking about her husband doing the most dangerous work imaginable. I'm not sure there's a more dangerous job in the world than coal mining. And I know of what I speak because of the corner of Pennsylvania I'm from, the anthracite coal region. Here's another letter from the same corner of the state, southwestern Pennsylvania. In this case in particular, talking about the pension legislation which is before the Senate right now, the so-called Butch-Lewis Act. Here's what this man says about his family. He said, "We gave up," in talking about the way he earned a pension, he said, "We gave up pay raises to get a meager pension, and as we get older, we can't start over. Please pass the Butch-Lewis Act." A third letter, also from southwestern Pennsylvania, in this case from Westmoreland County, just to the east of Pittsburgh, one county over from where Pittsburgh is. This individual talks about the pension that he received. Said, "I'm facing pension cuts that will have an immediate and devastating impact on my family." And he goes on from there. We have even more letters. A letter from the same corner of the state, Fayette County, one of the great counties of Pennsylvania, in the most southwestern corner, right next to Greene County, right on the, depending on which side you're looking at, the Ohio or the West Virginia border. This individual said to me in the letter, "There are so many retired miners, widows, and families that rely upon those benefits each month, including my mother and me. She is a widow, and I have cerebral palsy, and we depend on my dad's pension to survive on the limited income." So whether it's the miner speaking about the pension that they earned and their hope, their expectation, which is a reasonable expectation, that the promise made in that pension would be fulfilled. Or it's from the perspective of a son or a daughter or a wife, or even, unfortunately in many cases, a widow, talking about a minor who had passed away. Here's another letter from southwestern Pennsylvania, talking about that word I just used, promise. Quote, this pension, quote, was a promise made by the government. We kept ours. Now we hope that you will continue to keep the promise. Keep the promise. All in capital letters by this individual. This man says he's 73 years old, and he says, if I were to lose my pension, my wife and I would be forced to live in poverty. Here's another letter, another pension letter. This is not from a coal miner, but from a retired truck driver. Another group of Americans affected when the United States Senate doesn't get pension legislation done, like we can do in the next couple of days. He said, quote, I'm a retired truck driver. Spent 25 years of my life in this occupation, and asking me as his representative, as his senator, if you can do whatever you can to preserve that pension for my wife and me. Another letter from the northeastern corner of Pennsylvania, not far from where I live, talking about the same act, the Butch-Lewis Act, says in this case, talking about his father, my father for over 25 years was paying into a pension. He was a dock worker, physically loading trucks by hand. He did this to provide for my family and to ensure we had medical coverage and also a pension. Then talks about how the pension, he was told, his dad was told at one point the pension was wiped out. Everything he had worked for was taken away. He worked hard for 25 years, nights, weekends, double shifts sometimes, on and on and on. Well, I heard from the majority leader last night that somehow these kinds of issues that are part of this larger debate were not urgent. He said the only urgent matter is the government funding bill. I would agree that that is urgent, but I would also agree that if you're a retired coal miner or the family of a retired coal miner or a retired truck driver, or you are owed a pension of any kind for all the work that you did in your life, your situation's urgent. It's not something we can put off and say, well, why don't you wait another 6 months? Wait for a couple more CRs, continuing resolutions, and we'll get to you later. The pension issue is as urgent as any other. And there's a lot of talk around here as if it isn't. It's very, very urgent. I'll give you another urgent issue, the issue of community health centers. Here's a letter I received from southeastern Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia, talking about funding for community health centers. Just like the pension issue, not addressed in the House proposal or the House bill that passed. They don't address pensions. They don't address community health centers. And by the way, the deadline for community health centers, just like children's health, was way back in October the 1st. I'm glad that some Republicans are finally, after more than 100 days, starting to clue in a little bit to children's health insurance. They're talking about it. It's great that they're finally talking about children's health insurance, which they haven't talked about much since they let the deadline expire months ago. The majority party allowed that to happen. Maybe by midnight tonight they'll start talking about community health centers that serve 800,000 people in Pennsylvania. I hope they start talking about it at least. Maybe we can even come together and get something done. But here's what she says about community health centers. We serve hundreds of thousands of underserved people who deserve the quality of care we provide. They have lives filled with trauma and in turn suffer from social, physical, and behavioral issues that will go untreated if funding for community health centers goes away. I guess that's not urgent. If you rely upon a community health center for your health care, it is urgent. It's every bit as urgent as anything we've talked about in the last couple of days and weeks. The House bill does nothing on that. Nothing for minors' pensions, nothing for pensions, nothing on community health centers. And we're supposed to just accept that and move on and have another continuing resolution when they don't even address it in their proposal. Here's another letter about community health centers, talking about the patients living in rural and underserved areas, who are in areas where there is a great need for health centers. I guess it's not urgent for those folks in rural areas who depend upon these health centers. As I said, in Pennsylvania, if you look at the total, rural and urban and everything in between, 800,000 people. I guess it's not urgent for them. And this House bill does nothing for those community health centers and those people who live in rural and urban areas who depend upon those health centers. But I guess we should just wait. Wait another month, wait another 6 months, wait another year for community health centers to be funded. And the majority allowed funding for those to expire, just like they allowed funding for children's health insurance to expire. Here's another letter talking about health centers. This individual says, if Congress kicks this can down the road one more time, it'll be a signal to health centers that we need to implement measures that will result in site closures, layoffs, and reduced services. I guess it's not urgent. I guess it's not urgent. Community health centers. How about this program that is also not addressed in the House legislation? The maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program. This is an evidence-based home visiting program that supports at-risk pregnant women and young families. A great program that's been in place for the last couple of years. In fiscal year 2017, funding was about $400 million. That's not addressed either. I guess that's not urgent. Just like community health centers and just like pensions for retired coal miners and truck drivers and others. None of this, apparently, according to the majority, is urgent. None of this is urgent. I'll tell you what was urgent for the majority. The end of last year, November and December, an obsession with getting a tax bill passed, which did pretty well for the super rich and big corporations. There was all kinds of time for that. Negotiations between and among Republicans, discussions and changes in the bill between and among Republicans only for a tax bill. That was really urgent. To get that tax bill rammed through, that was really urgent. So children's health insurance, that had to wait, even though in December it was already 2 months overdue, 2 months after expiration. Community health centers, they had to wait as well because you had to get your Republican tax bill done. All of that had to wait. Coal miners' pensions, that has to wait too, because you had to get the tax bill done for the rich and for corporations. How about the issue that received a lot of attention? The so-called DACA program, the Dreamers. Right now we've got 7 Senate Republicans, at last count, it might have gone higher. 7 Senate Republicans have joined with Senate Democrats on a bipartisan bill to do a lot of things, but principally improve border security and help young dreamers. That's a bill that's ready to go right now. And it's urgent because people have been deported, and both parties assert that they're concerned about these dreamers. Well, we could get it done right now. One Republican senator said he could get it done in half an hour. Let's say he's way off. Maybe in hours and certainly a few days we could get that done as well. So there is a lot that is urgent, and there is a lot that's left on the table with this House bill that came over last night. I hope that both parties can continue to negotiate. I hope that we will heed the words that were sent out last night by the Defense Department. Dana W. White, here's what she said, quote, "We have been working under a continuing resolution for 3 years now," meaning the Defense Department. "Our current CR expires tomorrow, January 19th. This is wasteful and destructive," unquote. So she hopes, and I think our military hopes, that we don't keep kicking the can down the road. Let's come together and get so much done for the American people that we can get done tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow night, Sunday morning.